I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Elizabeth, for the introduction. Thank you, Robert Ivy, George Miller, all the other people I've worked with over the years. I was a little late because I was backstage talking to Moshe. I was watching his speech, and he is a longtime friend of mine that we met through the late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. And as all of you know, he designed Crystal Ridges, a great art museum in Northwest Arkansas, and it's a beautiful place if you've never seen it. But we were laughing about how he came to that work. Alice Walton invited him to look at the site and said, "Moshe, would this be a good site?" He said, "I think it's wonderful." She said, "Do you want the job?" I don't know if any of you ever got a job this way. And he said, "You want the job?" He said, "Well, Alice, this is a very big project. Don't you think you ought to have a competition?" She said, "I did. You won." So you should all look for a deal like that. I am delighted to be here and delighted that you are focusing on the question of impact. The AIA has been a partner with our foundation on projects around the world on resiliency in the built environment particularly. And I'm very grateful to all of you because you spend your days designing not only the world that we live in, but the one my very young granddaughter will inherit. The theme this year, impact, is important to me because we've been focusing on this a lot at the Clinton Global Initiative. A couple of years ago, our theme was designing for impact. Don't worry, I didn't come here to sue you for patent infringement. I really applaud it. And it's something you probably think about all the time, but for us, we just thought about the goals and then try to figure out on an ad hoc basis how to achieve them. But thanks to focusing on this, we began to realize the importance of designing the project from the beginning. And I can give you a lot of examples of how that has affected not just our partners through the Clinton Global Initiative, but also the work our foundation is doing, especially in healthcare around the world, trying to design health systems that countries can afford to run that will stop things like Ebola epidemics from getting out of hand. Then the next year we had a theme, mobilizing for impact. How to put together the logistics, the resources to implement supply and distribution networks that would actually make our designs become a reality. And so then the third year, last year, we took stock of what had worked and what hadn't in a meeting called Reimagining Impact, and we used it to update and improve our processes. So I'm very grateful to you for doing this. When we started, 65% of the commitments at the first Clinton Global Initiative involved more than one participant, more than one individual, more than one NGO, more than one corporation, and 35% didn't. Now more than 90% do, and there are partnerships, and there's a real reason for that. We found that on average, the partnership commitments had actually exceeded their goals. And the non-partnership commitments got to about, the ones that succeeded got to about 90% of their goals. So it proves something that we all know, which is that when we work together with diverse partners toward a common objective, we have a greater chance to succeed. A few years ago, an American journalist named James Sorowecki wrote a book called The Wisdom of Crowds, in which he cited this mountain of social science evidence that groups make better decisions than brilliant individuals. For example, if instantaneously in this vast crowd we could identify the person with the highest IQ, maybe have some volunteers here. But let's say we got somebody here with 190 IQ, and we took them off and put them in a room and gave them whatever their heart's desire was for the next 2 days and fed questions into them. The rest of us, we had to stay here in this big crowded room and drink not quite hot coffee. And we got the same questions. Over a 2-day period, the group would make better decisions than the genius. And there are lots and lots of reasons for that, but it's important to emphasize that, in my opinion, in a highly complicated, rapidly changing environment where we have big challenges and massive opportunities, inclusive decision making is necessary to lead to inclusive economic progress, inclusive political participation, inclusive social progress, and to increase the likelihood that we can minimize the forces of destruction in our interdependent world. There is no question that in ways large and small, those of you who are designing the built environment are going to have a big impact on it. When I did photographs backstage, I had conversations about people who were designing schools in Syria or in refugee camps, people who were aching to go to Nepal and did that and help them quickly recover from the earthquake, both by designing schools for children and housing that would be more earthquake resistant in the future. I'm sure all of you read the same articles I did about how the growth of the country basically was undertaken without regard to the geological challenges presented in the event of an event like that which they tragically just experienced. So I think this is really important. And the way I look at the current world, your role is perhaps more important than it ever has been. We are living in the most interdependent age in human history. Why? Because of technology, travel, the mobility of money, as well as people and technology, and because all of this means that borders look more like nets than walls. There's a lot of wonderful things about it. That's how come you're all in these chairs today. We are the beneficiaries of the interdependent world. But it has some very, very significant challenges. First of all, both within and across borders, there is a profound inequality, not just in incomes, but in access to employment, capital for business, education, healthcare, and the other things that contribute to quality of life. Secondly, the world is more unstable because of its interdependence. The good news about the instability is that good things can happen in a hurry. A couple years ago, the World Bank did a simple analysis saying that every increase of 10% in cell phone penetration in poor countries added 0.6% to GDP in those countries. And I saw that myself working in the aftermath of the Southeast Asian tsunami or the Haitian earthquake. In the aftermath of the earthquake, most Haitians didn't have a bank account, even before the earthquake. So we got a Canadian bank that partnered with the biggest cell phone company in Haiti because they did all have cell phones, and all of a sudden there was an explosion in basic banking participation in a way that is building the economy on a broader base now. We also know what people think about it, because most of the people who are trying to break down the 21st century world through technology believe our differences are more important than our common humanity. And there's a response to that. People are voting with their feet. They're trying to get as far away from ISIS as they can. Why is ISIS a group with lots of guns and skilled bank robbers, so obsessed with persecuting the tiny Yazidis, one of the oldest monotheistic religions on the face of the earth, with only a few tens of thousands of members left, because they think our differences are more important than what we have in common. So whenever you read, as we did in the last 2 days, about the Yazidis being killed again by ISIS, or you see them unforgivably compromising the whole future of little children by having them drag people to be executed in full view of the world over the internet, or you read about Pakistani radicals killing Ismailis, the most progressive and peaceful branch of Islam, also the most financially successful. Whenever you see all this, I recommend you think about it in terms of the larger struggle of the 21st century world, which is how in a world when we're all thrown together do we define ourselves and the people we care about and the dreams we have? Do we do it by negative reference to other people or positive reference? Do we want to live in a world where it's us versus them, or where every single day the circle of us gets bigger and the circle of them gets smaller? It is the fundamental question before us all, and it should be at the heart of the work you do to design the built environment. Because the third big challenge after the identity conflicts of interdependence and the inequality problems that technological advance have presented is the fact that our whole growth model for the last 200 years is not sustainable, because it requires us to put more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. The way we produce and consume energy and local resources is simply not sustainable. To the extent that we're going to avoid the worst consequences of climate change, we are depending on you and people like you, and those who begin more to think like you about how to design the environment in which we live and work. I am really glad that Elizabeth's going to represent the AIA in Durban, South Africa at the World Architecture Conference, because Africa had great urban and rural environments, including some of the most advanced architecture in the world, but some of the great challenges. It matters, for example, how and where you build health clinics. I just spent a day with our foundation just took its annual trip to Africa, and my daughter and I broke off for a day and went to Liberia right before they were declared Ebola free, so I still have to check my temperature twice a day, but relax, so far I can't even get to 98.6. But here's what I want to say. I went there for several reasons, one of which is for people who work in Liberia on AIDS and the prevention of mother-to-child transmission, and were there trying to help build the beginnings of a healthcare system after 14 years of civil war. They were asked to stay, and they didn't leave Liberia for a single day, working on case management in Ebola, and by the grace of God, none of them were infected. And so I wanted to go and thank them, thank the government, and then talk about what we're going to do going forward. But we have to do what we're trying to do in Rwanda, which is to design a health system that will prevent the worst things from happening at a price that the country can afford. We are working with over 20 medical schools, nursing schools, dental schools, Yale Health Management School, to design in Rwanda a system that will need no out-of-country money to operate. Just they'll need it to buy medicine for AIDS and things like that, but just operations by 2020. that doing this work in a developing environment is quite different than doing it in an advanced environment. Wealthy countries have systems we take for granted. Look at what we're doing here today. You would be quite surprised if the microphones went off, or the lights failed, or the air conditioning failed. If you are really bored with this talk, you can excuse yourself and go get a clean glass of water or go to the restroom. I spent a lot of my life in places where we can't take any of that for granted. One of the sites I visited in Tanzania not very long ago on this trip to Africa was a place where we established vaccine cold chain supply. Because you have to keep, if you want vaccines to work, you have to keep them between 5 and 9 degrees centigrade. And if you want them to work, people have to be able to get to them. So we were on the edge of the Ngorongoro crater in a health clinic where our partners had provided solar power to, among other things, maintain the capacity of a small refrigerator to take care of the vaccine supply, which enabled rural mothers from a rather large area to come in. The first person I met was a woman with a 6-month-old baby boy, finally getting him his basic vaccines and vitamin A, and she had walked 12 miles across the hills to get her baby things that we take for granted here. And that was much closer than any other facility was before. But you have to design for that. So in America, we have these things, and what we have to do is reform them, which brings me to the last point I wanted to make. I think still in the U.S. fight against climate change, we have avoided too much low-hanging fruit. When Mayor Bloomberg was in office in New York, where our foundation is, he personally paid one summer for young people to have summer jobs, which only required about an hour's worth of training, to go out and paint the flat black tar roofs in our older buildings white. In New York City, properly done, that cuts average greenhouse gas emissions in the summer and average utility bills by 19%. Slapping white paint on the roof, just that. Then if the roofs are properly sealed and have the right support, you can build urban gardens. Mexico City has air that's cleaner than Los Angeles on a clean day, partly because of the vertical gardens they built up and down the walls, as well as the $500 million trees that the previous administration in Mexico City planted. We overlook the low-hanging fruit at our peril. With our global initiative for the American economy, I started talks about 4 years ago, and we wound up with public and private pension funds led by the building trades and the American Federation of Teachers committing $14 billion to retrofit buildings to make them more efficient. So far, a little over $6 billion has been spent. More than 50,000 jobs have been created doing that. And I think we are underappreciating the low-hanging fruit and underfunding it. I still hope there will be, sometime in the next 2 years, an agreement on how to establish an infrastructure bank and fund it by repatriating overseas corporate cash. But we also have, in the early years of the Obama administration, the Congress did authorize the issuance of certain green bonds, and they sold pretty well and did a lot of good. But we're devoting nowhere near enough investment in America to job-intensive, environment-improving, low-hanging fruit projects. And we need to design for that as well as all the modern things that are out there. I guess the bottom line of this is, you got a lot of work to do. And this is a very, very important and exciting time to be an architect. I am personally grateful for the help that I received in building our presidential library, which became the first Platinum LEED federal building ever built. And we're next door to the international headquarters of Heifer, and it's also a Platinum LEED building, and I believe they're the first two headquarters buildings that were next to each other that are both Platinum buildings anywhere in the United States. So I've been honored to try to do my part. I'm frustrated that we haven't done better, but I don't want to forget the low-hanging fruit, the impact on our future environment, and our current job crisis could be exceedingly positive. And you are committed to design for impact. The thing that frustrates me is when I hear people who ought to know better basically say they're in climate denial in part because they don't think a country can get rich, stay rich, and grow richer unless it puts more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Your designs can prove that we'll get richer quicker and stay rich longer and reduce poverty and set an example for the rest of the world if we reduce our emissions and make the future sustainable. So, I thank you for what you're doing. But when you go home from this meeting, I ask you all to examine exactly how you operate and whether you can do more. I really believe that the 21st century is still likely to be the most interesting, successful time in human history, but it depends on decisions yet to be made impacting on inequality, instability from identity politics, and the problems of climate change. In all three areas, your work can have a profound impact. Thank you very much.